So, Episode 2 takes the parting energy of the premiere's impromptu concert and channels it into enthusiasm for the new adventure of Momoka and Nina's fledgling startup band. Low on funds, but high on defiance. A second chance for both of them to prove the world wrong and... Wait, what do you mean we're not starting a band? Okay, I certainly can appreciate how the combination of the last scene and the credits made the formation of a band seem like a foregone conclusion, only to pull something of a reversal in an episode that instead centers around Nina's struggles. That interruption in our expectations is like a vehicle lurching out of gear. It forces our attention on the incongruity. Nina's hang-ups are now not just a problem for her, but for us and the story we thought we signed up for. The circumstances in her past and how she's facing them are her main objections to getting involved with Momoka's band, but are also arguably the main reasons she should consider doing so. That seeming contradiction is right at home in Nina, as she presents this episode as someone determined to hold competing ideas in her head. Early on, when Momoka is making them dinner as a thank you, it comes up that Nina doesn't have a knife or even any dishes, and she wonders how she'll even be able to live on her own. But she then proceeds throughout the episode to try to do as much by herself as possible. She's come all the way to the big city just to escape the situation in her past, but is apparently still checking up on the popular mean girl that bullied her. And of course, she clearly loves to sing. She is unapologetically happy singing for Momoka's favor, but fights against dabbling in it with Momoka. Even seems unable to entertain the idea that she might be good at it. To Momoka, though, this messy, contradictory part of Nina is exactly what she wants in a bandmate. Making that a reality, though, won't be so simple. In fact, this anime has been far from simple so far. This time, for example, we have a role reversal from the premiere. Momoka was the defeated one last time, surrendering a dream with barely a whimper, while Nina was the assertive and defiant one who barged into her life and tried to change her course. Successfully, as it turns out, putting Momoka up for a few days while she tries to reverse her move out and reacquire her job. A U-turn in Momoka's life, and now she can climb back towards the original dream, essentially from scratch. Nina, though, seems to have used up all that disruptive energy on Momoka. Our delightful middle finger motif shows up again, as just as Momoka is packed up, preparing her restart, Nina will return the guitar and its defiant graffiti to her. It's almost as if doing this means Nina passes that spirit of the message to Momoka, and she doesn't keep any of it for herself. For Nina's following week involves her going to cram school and studying and not much else. Interacting with no classmates, eating alone, and generally doing something very similar to what it seems she had been doing at home, existing as an outsider. It will then be Momoka's turn to try to disrupt her status quo, trying to coax her into music, inviting her to dinner, introducing her to Subaru, confronting her over her standoffish manner, and at the end, quite literally invading her space. Momoka senses that the things Nina is saying and doing are her going through motions, and not what she really wants if she could choose it, which is more or less what Nina did for her in the premiere. The problem, arguably, is that Nina is still aimless, as we discussed last episode. She does have a goal, it turns out, to gain admittance to university, and she is here to study towards that end, but it isn't something she really wants, so much as it's just the least worst option. In the flashback with her father, he voices something similar, that it'll be too late if you figure out what you want to be later. That is, it's framed as keeping options open, as avoiding unnecessary risk, as steering her life away from something instead of towards something. The scene itself is telling. Her father turned away from her, the overstuffed ashtray, the bandage on her forehead. The words aren't by themselves unusual. A father trying to impress on his daughter the importance of setting herself up for the future. But the other elements create a feeling of unease, of stress, a situation Nina wants simply to escape. This time, then, we have a return of movement or place as a symbolic element, but it plays out a little bit differently with Momoka's involvement. She will direct Nina to a different station, a different way to return home, points out a grocery store she can frequent, and Nina herself spins around in a bit of confusion, even running into a barrier while Momoka walks with easy purpose. The earlier instance where Nina wondered aloud if she could live alone was actually answered by Momoka, as she reminds her of herself, and that Nina will just have to tackle these things head on. Like I said last time, Momoka is like Nina shifted in time, having also dropped out at 17 and come to the city, and she now navigates things with ease. This probably contributes to her willingness to look out for Nina, and here is showing her the way in a literal sense to reflect the other guidance I think she's likely to provide. Relatedly, we have a return of that close but not quite element. Just as her apartment is not quite in Tokyo, the riverside where Nina sings is across the water from the city proper. Her singing and joy at doing so is her being so close, but refusing to join Momoko and her band is remaining on the farther shore. She says she had no idea a place like this existed in the city, and she likewise has no idea what kind of potential experiences await her if she relents and joins Momoko's group. But just as Momoko lets Nina pick which song she wants to sing, she's likewise hoping that Nina will join her because it's what she wants. And part of Momoko's tactic towards that end involves a few conversations about music itself. Last episode, we had some insight into what music meant to Nina, and this time it is Momoko's turn. Another role reversal. To me, this signals that the work isn't going to treat forming a band as just any kind of activity that people can strive toward and bond over, but it's interested in exploring the subject itself. Which is good news for me, since almost the last thing I said in the first video was that I wanted to see that theme continue. Anyway, there's three main instances. The first is as they ride the train, and Momoko shares that she thinks of a band as a group of people who have a lot of stuff they want to say. In fact, she thinks Nina should sing not just because she has a good voice, but because she has a good soul. Although, the way she describes a band as building up group pressure until it explodes sounds like the last thing Nina would be tempted by, it was clearly fun for Momoko for all that. She is nostalgic about the experience. She wants to repeat it. Nina and her mess of contradictions seem like a natural fit. After all, she had her own little version of exploding this time. The second instance is split around their Nabe session. On the front end, Momoko will compare songwriting to cooking, working on multiple separate things at the same time, eventually bringing them together into something unified. The Nabe itself then becomes a song metaphor. Disparate elements simmer together until their flavors seep into one another, and though the dish is shared, each still takes from it what they personally prefer, such as Nina liking her vegetables to stay in long enough to become soft. A repeat of the idea of a song having individual meanings for each person who hears it, what they take from it. Later in the meal, we get the complementary idea of the personal, individual things that go into the song. Nina shares a bit of her past, which we will return to, and Momoko's response is that she could write 5 songs just from that experience. The ingredients, if you will, are the challenging experiences and the strong emotions that arise from them. Music is the something that you can make out of such turmoil. Finally, at nearly the end, Momoko will speak about music and Nina together, and in doing so, is combining all of these previous ideas. She'll tell Nina that she's negative and complicated, but because she can't lie to herself. She's so fragile, but still hates to bend her views. And then she compares her directly to the songs she says she had forgotten about, the ones she loves and wants to keep holding on to. You know, it's such a sweet and gentle way to validate Nina's confused feelings, and Nina doesn't disappoint in living up to Momoko's description, responding to this peacemaking attempt by telling her that she doesn't need her kindness. Last episode, Momoko seemed at one point unbothered by giving away her song, indifferent even, and it was the first point of friction between them. But now, I suspect it was a defensive indifference, putting distance between herself and the song since it's lost to her anyway. Certainly, the Momoko this episode is very interested in songs and song making. She loves them, she thinks of the humanity within them, she's introspective about the whole process, and she so badly wants to share it with others. Yet again, a reversal, but perhaps we understand why this passion was absent at the time. Her mind was on the end of it all, of leaving and admitting defeat. In that state, it would be hard to properly see all that was enticing about being a part of the music. In that light, then, we should be able to understand Nina's own reluctance, a reluctance towards joining Momoko and towards befriending Subaru, and they come from the same place. We got a peek into what lies across Nina's past in 2 different places, and I think it's worth noting the context each time. In both cases, it's around a shared meal, in fact, the same kind of meal, and the forced evening meals of her family's precepts seem to feature prominently in the environment that she strove to escape. The mental image she conjures is telling all on its own. where the meal and precepts are lighted, but her family and surrounding home are obscured. It's as though the memory of the precepts, looming over everything, and the enforced shared meals are what stick out to her. In fact, I found myself wondering if she is having a bit of trauma response from these shared dinners with Momoka. Anyway, the family precepts are not themselves enough to explain Nina's distress. Eating dinner together, a regular family meeting, a ban on phones in their shared space, that could actually be a wholesome set of goals. Keeping a family communicating, not just becoming strangers that occupy the same space. But with the limited insight we have so far, it seems as though the precepts are more of a symptom of a stifling and controlling environment. If her parents are proud of enforcing them, as Nina says, then perhaps they are more performative. Something for appearances, in absence of the familial warmth and unity that they would imply. Certainly, they could be a big disruption to the girls' social lives. If there's always a meeting on Sundays, then perhaps it interferes with making weekend plans with friends. If they must always eat dinner at home, then perhaps that means no after-school clubs, no karaoke, no visits to friends' homes. If phones are forbidden in the living room, but they are often required to be in the living room, then being cut off from calls or messenger just compounds the situation. If they insist on those rules in spite of the way they isolate Nina, then that doesn't build a happy family, it just builds resentment. Now, while that is conjecture on my part, Nina does share that her schoolmates found out about the precepts, and I think the way they'd interfere with her being able to socialize like the rest might be why. At that point, the precepts lead to fresh grief, an oddity that makes Nina a target for bullying, and by none other than the most popular girl and her friends. This no doubt isolates her further still. Worse, though, is the impression that her family regards the bullying as no big deal, even though Nina was hospitalized during some encounter. In such a situation, I can imagine Nina beginning to question herself, or being tempted to mold herself to the expectations of others to make her life easier, but it sounds like she's done nothing of the sort. She refuses to believe that she was the one in the wrong, which means everyone else was in the wrong, and I can imagine that the whole ordeal leaves Nina with rather pronounced trust issues. Indeed, Nina might even self-sabotage any attempts to form new relationships, pushing others away before there is any opportunity to be hurt by them. Remember her reluctance to accept help from her new neighbors, despite how desperate her situation. And this time, attending cram school and being surrounded by peers without ever speaking to anyone at all. The actual oddity is that she was able to connect to Momoka. I guess her song seemed like such a lifeline in Nina's desperate state that she basically fangirled her way past her own hang-ups long enough to make a new friend. However, when it comes to something like joining a band or being a singer, Nina might also be self-sabotaging. Giving up on the idea early may be easier for her to bear than trying something she might fail. After all, her whole move and college entrance plans are framed as her trying not to lose. She's taken too many L's, basically, and she can't risk another one in her fragile state. And what a fragile state it is, as evidenced by everything after Subaru's introduction to the episode. She's skipping for joy to have an excuse to see Momoka again, but Subaru's entrance is a hard left turn. Even the music drops away unceremoniously. While springing any friend on Nina would probably set her on edge, here is someone her age in a school uniform, just like those who were bullying her before. One thing I really liked about the third character introduction is we have this little pattern of good intentions that don't automatically lead to good results. Momoka no doubt wants to introduce them because she hopes they'll all make music together, and highlighting Subaru's age makes me think that she was hoping to help Nina make new friends in the city. Subaru can actually pick up on Nina's discomfort and tries to extract herself from the dinner plans, but she gives way to Momoka's own intent. The lamp which provided the reason to get together is actually from her, which, in retrospect, seems like something less happenstance than presented. Momoka knew she needed a lamp and figured she needed new friends and wrapped them up together. Their dinner, then, is the other place where we gain insight into Nina's past, this time only in a flashback that the audience witness and Nina relives. Again, there are good intentions, such as Subaru trying to engage with Nina to ease the conversation, but Subaru and Momoka are musicians. They have more in common, and the conversation about music and concerts becomes one that Nina cannot contribute to. She is there in body, but in a sense is alone, and that sensation seems to tilt her into the dark memory. And it's great work to do so much with so little. There's no dialogue, a shot of the water over the desk and floor, the wide view of the classroom where other girls pointedly ignore her, darkened and desaturated rendering to echo the mood, and then her acceptance as she simply sits in the midst of the mess. Bullying, ostracization, and defeat, and all the while Subaru and Momoka's conversation continues without her as dull background din. Her friendship with Momoko suddenly doesn't seem like a fresh new chapter in her life, but a return to the same social dynamic she left, where she is perennially the outsider. She's wrong, though. Even though she retreats to the restroom, Momoko doesn't allow her to give up before starting, and confronts her about her attitude. What Momoko will say about her later is relevant here, that Nina is so negative and complicated because she can't lie to herself. Nina does not feel comfortable, and she knows Subaru is intentionally trying to make it easier for her. It galls her regardless of the intent, and she won't pretend that it doesn't. I think for Nina to have held on to herself to this point has required a lot of stubborn faith in her own viewpoint. But that inflexible nature is no asset when it comes to the give and take of relationships. Ultimately, she doesn't like the situation, and so she does not stay in it. What perhaps rescues Nina a bit for the audience, though, is what happens afterwards. Once removed from the discomfort of the conversation, Nina can accurately assess Subaru's intent, her kindness and patience in trying to connect to her, and she chastises herself for her behavior. I'd like here to highlight something about Nina that I think also grows out of the past we've seen. Nina seems to be reluctant to show emotion in front of others. The way she goes cold on the phone with her family, the way tension boils out of her in animated lines rather than words, the way she only cries over Momoko moving out once she's alone, the way she just sits at the wet desk rather than make a scene, and the way she excused herself to the restroom during the meal. All of these seem like someone who has been discouraged from expressing herself, or has met with ill outcomes when she does. I think it's significant that she's been able to show a little fire towards Momoko, but that still was just a kind of raised edge to her voice. Now that she's alone on the street, though, she is free to pour it all out. Tears at first, and then anger as she shouts at herself. In the premiere, when someone yelled at her because the sound of her luggage bothered them, she meekly complied and picked her stuff up. This time, the complaint is far more valid, but our hapless bystander has terrible timing, running into a Nina who is uncorking a lot of pent-up frustration. Anger at oneself is some of the hardest to bear, and so any external target looks tempting by comparison. She shoots him the pinky bird, and he doesn't understand. And of course not, as the person who could understand is the one she just ran away from. So Nina lets even more anger out, and in her moment of madness, she even smashes the gifted lamp, recklessly and thoughtlessly, the same as she smashed up the dinner date. The light as metaphor isn't done there either. Despite being partially shattered, Nina brings it home, but cannot plug it in. She can't do it alone. Any of it, seemingly, and she melodramatically claims that she'll never escape the darkness. On cue, Momoko and Subaru let themselves in, and while Momoko tries again to convince Nina to join them, Subaru will plug in the light. This time, Subaru won't be unfailingly polite, but calls Nina a pain and gets a punch in the shin for her commentary. Well, Subaru had offered Nina a blemishless, pristine friendship introduction, and she threw it back at her. So now she gets the cracked and jagged one instead. But the cracked and jagged lamp works all the same, and Nina's apartment is filled with light. Last episode we began and ended in train stations, and this time we begin and end in this room. But we started with darkness, with Nina's eyes closed, and we end in light, imperfect though it may be. There's also a nice little callback to the first scene in the milk. Momoko had taken Nina's milk in her hungover state, but Nina is inflexible, annoyed because she had asked if she'd wanted any the night before. I have to imagine Nina has very little experience with drunks or hangovers, and she isn't sympathetic. She won't put herself out to help ease Momoko's self-inflicted pain. Now at the end, you guessed it, the roles are reversed, and Nina is the one who has gotten herself into a world of hurt. But Momoko is sympathetic in her turn, and has brought her a gift of the same milk. Receiving it, she bursts into tears. And while there's a kind of amusing chaos to that last bit of her crying while the other two laugh, remember what I said earlier about Nina showing emotion. These unself-conscious displays of anger and tears in front of them is perhaps progress. perhaps a harbinger of a more flexible and honest Nina to come. Okay, time again for the casual version of our 5 masters. For goals, we did learn that Nina is here to study towards admittance to college, but it seems like a goal of last resort. We want to enumerate the goals of characters because striving towards them is part of the engine of the plot, but this hardly seems like one to motivate her. If anything, it seems more apt to hold her back. For Momoko, though, it's more clear. She wants to form a new band, but seemingly just because she loves music and she wants to do it again with other people who have something to say. That motivation is plain to see in her actions this episode, both in recruiting Subaru and in the way she talks about music to Nina. More specific goals on this front will no doubt arise in time, but we can track her progress and understand her decisions. For Subaru, we don't really know enough yet. She's in acting school, but we don't know to what end, and joining the band implies some interest there, but it may be different from Momoko's. Hence are all we have for now. Last time in Conflicts, only the multiple mentions of finances gave us anything concrete, but this time around it seems less of a concern. Nina is limited in how often she can attend cram school, so funds aren't unlimited, but she isn't shown to search for part-time work, and Momoko apparently manages to just go back to what she was doing. Maybe Subaru will turn out to be a rich girl. We can, however, add Nina's internal state as a source of conflict that needs addressing. Momoko is motivated towards that end at least, and I feel like everything after Nina left their dinner might mean that she'll be open to facing her demons. Certainly, Momoko already suggested that songwriting could be an outlet. Characterization is, again, a lot of what we already discussed. It's a good chance it will be that way most episodes. I think the striking difference in Momoko this episode compared to last is the most noteworthy thing, even though Nina's characterization makes a stronger impression. The two really work together, actually, as Momoko's shift and her patience in dealing with Nina are probably both due to Nina's actions in the premiere. Nina's impulsive and stubborn actions last time kept Momoko from going all the way through with her plan to abandon music, and all her romantic descriptions this time suggest to me that she really is grateful that Nina was so stubborn. In that light, how can she not just put up with Nina, but try to give her a little help as well? Nina is a handful, but that's more of a problem for the other girls. For us, she will make an interesting character, one who is already in flux. Subaru's time is brief, but is used pretty efficiently. She was observant in knowing Nina didn't want her to go to dinner, courteous in trying to excuse herself, patient in trying to engage Nina despite little cooperation, but then willing to throw a little shade her way once the time for politeness is over. An actor and a drummer is an interesting combination, one defined by being in the spotlight, and the other for being the supporting rhythm hidden behind their kit. I wonder which, if either, most informs her personality. For world building, we have the beginnings of Nina's history that led to our inciting events, and a more concrete idea of what she is doing near Tokyo. Though we have the actions clear enough, the dropping out due to bullying, the attempts to get into college all the same, I suspect we don't have a complete picture of all that transpired. Nina will claim she has no idea why she in particular was picked on by the popular girl, but we also just saw Nina try to assault some poor dude with a lamp, so who knows what kind of incidents occurred in and around the bullying period. We can also add that Momoko has successfully begun starting a band, and I approve of the choice here, as she will add Subaru in the meantime and not stop everything to try to win Nina over first. The band can be assembled and introduced into the story without having to give Nina's own hang-ups short shrift. In theme, I belabored the point, but role reversal was all over this episode. A lot of it focused on Momoko trying to give back to Nina or to look out for her. Taking that and pairing it with her nostalgic musing over being in a band, I can imagine we're going to get a lot of focus on interpersonal dynamics and how that relates to music making. Maybe that will be a distinct thread, or maybe it will be part of the aforementioned idea, the very personal side of what goes into a song and what one takes out of it. That one at least seems primed to stay. I do wonder, however, if Momoko's description of the band whose pressure built up to the point of exploding may not be a bit of foreshadowing. Otherwise, I think that aimlessness idea is still lingering, reflected in more symbolic use of place or movement. We also had a return of symbolic elements that have shifting meaning. The milk and the lamp, I mentioned those already, but the middle finger gets a new variation to the pinky finger instead. In the premiere, Nina accidentally but happily flips off the workers, and then defiantly flips off the whole world, basically. And in this one, It's like she aimed for a middle way, a pinky-sized bit of defiance, an inoffensive bit of rebellion, instead of the full send. That certainly could describe her behavior throughout most of the episode, with the great irony of her using it herself and then taking the most wildly aggressive action yet. Maybe she's trying to make her defiance more presentable, but it hasn't actually shrunk at all. Anyway, that's all. I think with that last chaotic scene, we are truly underway. After all, it's got girls, and band, and cry. Boo! Get off the stage! See you next time.